You never expect the last time to feel like the last time. You think there will always be another laugh, another call, another chance to fix what was broken. But for Brandon Swanson, there wasn't. It was May 14th, 2008, a quiet spring night in Minnesota, the kind where the wind is soft and the roads stretch empty for miles. Brandon had just finished his last day of classes at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. He was 19 years old, studying wind energy, smart, friendly, sharp-witted. That night, he celebrated with friends in the small town of Canby. A few drinks, some goodbyes, nothing wild. Around midnight, Brandon got into his car, a Chevy Lumina, and began the 30-mile drive back to his parents' home in Marshall. It was a route he knew well, a stretch of open land, 2-lane highways, a few gravel shortcuts if you were local. He never made it home. Sometime around 1:15 a.m., Brandon's car slid into a ditch. He wasn't hurt, the car wasn't damaged, but he couldn't get it to move, stuck. So he did what any kid would do. He pulled out his phone and called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson. They were half asleep, but when their son said he needed help, they didn't hesitate. He told them he'd driven off the road near Lind, a tiny town just outside of Marshall. They got in their pickup and started looking. They kept him on the phone the whole time, Brandon giving them directions, trying to describe landmarks in the dark. But something was off. His parents drove every road he described. They couldn't see his car, couldn't find him. And slowly, they all began to realize Brandon wasn't where he thought he was. For 47 minutes, they stayed on the phone with him. Calm voices, working together. At one point, Brandon got frustrated and said, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," then quickly apologized. He wasn't angry at them. He was just tired, disoriented. He was going to walk toward some lights he thought were from Lind and asked them to meet him there.
His voice was steady. He didn't sound afraid. He was used to the dark. He'd grown up in rural Minnesota. But then suddenly everything changed. Oh, shit. It was the last thing they ever heard him say.
The call disconnected. They tried to call back again and again. No answer. By 6:30 a.m., they contacted police. But the first response wasn't what they expected. The first few hours of a missing person case are everything. But in Brandon's case, they were wasted. When Annette and Brian reported their son missing that morning, the initial response from law enforcement was frustratingly casual. Officers suggested that maybe Brandon had just gone off to cool down or that he'd be home soon. After all, he was 19, legally an adult, and maybe he just needed space. But his parents knew better. He wasn't impulsive, he wasn't reckless, and he'd stayed calm on the phone until the very end. Never panicked. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Still, police waited. It wasn't until later that day, May 14th, that a search began in earnest. And almost immediately, a chilling detail surfaced. Brandon's phone records showed that he hadn't been near Lind at all. The last signal from his phone had pinged a tower near the town of Taunton, about 25 miles northwest of where he thought he was. That changed everything. Suddenly, the entire search grid had to be reimagined. The Swansons had spent the entire night combing the wrong roads. Once the area near Taunton was targeted, the search team made a discovery. They found Brandon's car, sitting near the edge of a gravel road, its front end slightly tipped into a shallow ditch, just as he'd described. No damage, no blood, no footprints leading away, just stillness. It was a dead end, literally. Dogs were brought in, trained blood hunts. They picked up a scent from the car and tracked it through fields, past a grove of trees, and then abruptly to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. The dogs hesitated. Some circled, some sat. Others followed the scent slightly downstream, then lost it entirely. For a moment, searchers feared the worst, that Brandon had fallen into the river and drowned. But the river wasn't deep, and over the next several days, search teams scoured the area. Boats, divers, thermal imaging, nothing. No clothing, no body, no phone, not a trace. It was as if Brandon Swanson had walked into the dark and vanished. But what made it harder, what haunted everyone involved, was how ordinary it all was. He hadn't been in the woods of some far-off national park. He was walking along farm roads near small towns and houses on a warm spring night, and then nothing. In the days that followed, the Swanson family lived in a kind of suspended reality. They set up camp near where Brandon's car had been found, refusing to go home. Search teams came and went. Volunteers showed up with boots and binoculars. Helicopters circled overhead. Every day brought new hope and new silence. People searched through fields and drainage ditches, under bridges, inside old barns and silos. Farmers gave permission for their land to be combed through, some walking beside strangers in quiet solidarity. Everyone wanted to help, but no one found him. And then the questions started. If Brandon wasn't where he thought he was, why not? He'd grown up in the area. He wasn't drunk or disoriented on the phone. His directions were specific. I can see the lights of Lind, but he wasn't anywhere near Lind. He was near Taunton, 25 miles away. So what did he really see? That single detail unraveled everything. Investigators started considering strange possibilities. Had Brandon been followed? Was he trying to avoid someone? Had he been lured? Did he give false directions on purpose? And if so, why? But none of it made sense. Brandon had been calm, steady. His voice never gave away fear or confusion until thus. A final moment. That sudden shout, the phone going dead, like something had changed in an instant. And that 1 second window became the most obsessed over fragment of the entire case. What had he seen? What had he stepped into? Some speculated that he'd fallen maybe into a hidden culvert or open well. Others believed he had a seizure or was struck by a vehicle. But none of these theories explain the absence of everything. There should have been some trace, a shoe, a phone, a body. But there was nothing. Just a quiet road, a shallow ditch, and a phone call that ended with a single wordless cry. The Swansons kept going. Every day they searched. For weeks, for months, they made maps, took shifts, hoped for a break. But the seasons changed and no answers came. By winter, the land was covered in snow. And Brandon's name began to fade from the headlines. As winter settled in, the prairie froze over. Searches became impossible. Roads turned to ice. The fields, once full of footprints and combed grass, were now silent, buried beneath layers of snow. The world had moved on, but the Swansons hadn't. They couldn't. They still believed Brandon was out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. And then, as the silence stretched on, something strange began to happen. Online forums picked up the case. True crime podcasts featured Brandon's story. Reddit threads dissected his final phone call frame by frame. People drew maps, compared soil elevations, analyzed cell tower pings. And the more they looked, the weirder it got. Why had Brandon driven northwest instead of straight home? Why did he say he could see the lights of Lind when he wasn't even close? And why, in the last few minutes of his call, did he walk toward lights that didn't exist? One theory exploded online: misdirection. What if Brandon wasn't alone that night? What if he had given his parents the wrong direct? Eons on purpose, because someone was with him, someone he didn't trust, or someone he feared. Another theory went darker. He'd stumbled onto something. Some speculated Brandon had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. A drug deal, a hidden facility, someone burying something. That final, "oh shh," before the call cut out was replayed thousands of times. Some said it sounded like a fall. Others said it sounded like fear. But no one could agree on what it meant. Investigators pushed back. They insisted there was no sign of foul play. Brandon's car showed no signs of struggle. His life had no red flags. He was a responsible, thoughtful young man. No enemies, no secrets. But that didn't stop the speculation. One podcast suggested a serial offender, someone who hunted in the rural Midwest and knew how to erase a person. Another pointed to local myths, a hidden cave system, underground rivers that could pull a body deep beneath the soil. Even the police were torn. Some officers believed Brandon had simply misjudged the terrain, that he'd fallen into water or become hypothermic in the darkness. Others weren't so sure. The area had been searched thoroughly, with dogs, with heat-seeking drones, with people who knew every ditch and thicket. But Brandon had vanished without a trace. And in a world full of noise and data, that kind of silence is almost impossible. The Swansons began writing letters to senators, to state officials, to governors, not to beg for help, but to demand change. They were no longer just grieving parents. They were advocates. Because in Minnesota at the time, law enforcement agencies weren't required to begin a search for a missing adult immediately, especially if there was no clear evidence of danger. That delay, even if it was only a few hours, might have made all the difference. So they fought to change the law. And in 2009, they did.
The Brandon Law was passed in Minnesota, requiring police to act immediately when an adult is reported missing under suspicious circumstances, even if there's no proof of foul play.
It was a victory, but not the one they wanted. They still didn't have their son. They had a law, but no answers. The passing of the Brandon Law gave the Swansons something they hadn't had since that night, a sense of movement, a way to turn their grief into purpose. But it wasn't closure, because Brandon was still missing, and the land still wasn't talking. In the spring, when the snow melted, volunteers returned to the fields, this time with new maps, new grids, new hope. Cadaver dogs were brought in again, dozens of them, trained to detect even the faintest traces of human remains. They covered the entire area around Porter's, mile after mile. They sniffed through trees, under old grain bins, along riverbanks swollen from the thaw, and then something. Near Mud Creek, one of the last places Brandon was believed to have passed, the dogs reacted. A strong alert. Multiple teams confirmed it. Something had once been there. A body? A piece of clothing? No one could say for certain. But the signal was strong enough to make investigators pause. They searched again and again, but there was nothing visible. No remains, no fabric, no shoes. Just an empty field and a chilling possibility that Brandon had been there and then swept away by time, by animals, by water, by the relentless churn of nature. But still, no proof, nothing concrete, just one more almost. His parents stood on that land, quiet, eyes on the ground, hoping for something, even if it meant finding the worst. But it didn't come. Months turned into years. The calls slowed down, the interviews stopped. The flyers, once posted in coffee shops and school bulletin boards, were now yellowing, torn, forgotten. But the Swansons kept searching. Every year on May 14th, the anniversary of Brandon's disappearance, they held a vigil. Sometimes it was just the two of them. Sometimes others came. People who didn't know Brandon but had heard his story. People who had once gotten a phone call in the middle of the night and knew the fear. They lit candles, said his name, promised not to forget, and still, the phone never rang. No new tip, no final word, just silence. In interviews, Brandon's mother often spoke of the pause, that quiet moment between searching and surrender, when hope hurts more than grief, when every day feels like standing on a bridge, waiting for a voice that may never come. And yet, they never truly gave up, because Brandon wasn't just a case. He was their son. He had freckles on his shoulders and liked to joke about becoming a weather forecaster. He loved animals. He called his parents when he was going to be late. He trusted them enough to call them when he was scared, out in the dark, all alone. That trust became their burden and their compass. They replayed his final call, again and again, listened for clues in his voice. Did he sound afraid? Did he hear something? Was there someone else out there just beyond the frame? To this day, no one knows. Not for certain. There's no evidence of foul play and no proof of an accident, just nothing. A young man steps out of his car into the dark. He walks. He talks on the phone. He disappears. Years have passed now. The world has moved on. But in the small towns of western Minnesota, Porter, Lind, Marshall, Brandon's name still lingers, quietly, like the wind through the tall grass. His case is sometimes brought up in classrooms, in lectures about missing persons, about how to respond when time is your enemy. Law enforcement officers still reference his story when training new dispatchers about what to listen for, what not to miss, because Brandon's story changed things. Not with sirens, not with headlines, but with the slow, painful lessons that only come from absence. The Brandon Law is now used across Minnesota. It saved lives. It's meant no more waiting. No more, he's probably just blowing off steam. No more lost hours. But for Brandon's family, the law was never enough. They still don't have him. They never found a shoe, a jacket, a phone, a single bone. It's as if the earth opened up and swallowed him whole. And that impossibility, that illness, is what keeps people talking. It's what draws strangers back to the story year after year, because nothing adds up. Brandon was not careless. He was not drunk enough to forget where he was. He called his parents calmly, reassured them, laughed with them. He trusted them enough to ask for help. And then he screamed. Just once. A sound like falling, a jolt of fear. Then silence. That sound has become the center of everything. Some believe he fell into a body of water, Mud Creek, the Yellow Medicine River, that he drowned in the dark and the current pulled him beyond reach. But no dogs ever found a body, no clothes, and the creek isn't that deep. Others believe he slipped, hit his head, and died of exposure, that his body is out there still, tangled in roots or buried beneath farmland. And then there are the darker theories, the ones that ask, what if someone was out there that night, a stranger, a truck, a scream in the distance that wasn't from falling, but fear? Nothing in the call suggests Brandon was followed. Nothing confirms another presence, but fear doesn't need proof. And the human mind is never comfortable with a clean disappearance. There's always a shadow, always a possibility. His parents don't entertain those theories anymore. They've lived too long with the weight of what if, the pain of imagining every scenario, every ending. Instead, they remember who Brandon was, a boy who loved animals, a student with plans for the future, a son who believed that home was just one phone call away. That final call, 47 minutes long, is all they have now. His voice, his footsteps, and then the end. There's a stretch of road near Taunton, just gravel and fields, nothing remarkable. But if you drive it at night, roll your window down and let the air hit your face, you might feel it, that hush, that unsettled quiet that never quite left. Some say it's just the prairie, just the wind. Others aren't so sure, because stories like Brandon's don't end. Not really. They echo. In the voice of a dispatcher taking a call. In a mother who still turns on her porch light each night, just in case. In a father who walks the same stretch of land every year, hoping. They still do that, you know. Every spring, when the thaw comes and the ground softens, they organize search parties. Volunteers, strangers, people who never knew Brandon, but feel tied to him now. They bring maps, drones, cadaver dogs. They search in silence, hoping for a sign, a fragment, anything. But the prairie holds its secrets tight. Over the years, Brandon's face has faded from the news. His posters have peeled from telephone poles. His name isn't a headline anymore. It's a question. One that floats through coffee shops in Marshall, through high school classrooms in Lind, through cold case files tucked away in basements. What happened that night? Where did he go? How can someone disappear completely, with a phone in their hand and their parents on the line? Sometimes the cruelest part of a mystery is how ordinary it all is. No monsters, no crimes of passion, no grand conspiracy, just a boy calling for help and vanishing. Brandon Victor Swanson would be in his late 30s now, maybe married, maybe a father himself, maybe still driving that old Chevy Lumina down quiet back roads, music playing low, windows cracked open to the night, but time froze in 2008. In that 47-minute call, in that single sharp cry, and in the silence that followed. To this day, his parents refuse to move. Their home is still the same. The same porch, the same phone number, in case he comes back. Because no matter how impossible it seems, they still believe. That's the thing about love. It doesn't let go. It waits. Even when the road disappears, even when the stars go out, even when all that's left is wind and field and a name whispered through corn stalks, he walked into the dark one night and never came back. But if you listen closely, on the right night, in the right place, you might still hear him calling out across the prairie, trying to find his way home.